Why was no one stopping him? That question burned in her mind as the blow landed, sharp and brutal, against the side of her head. She staggered, but she did not fall. The concrete floor of the training bay swam beneath her boots. Her ears rang. For a second the world blurred, men shouting, boots scuffing, the metallic echo of steel doors. But silence followed just as quickly, a silence heavier than the strike itself. She pressed a palm against the side of her head, not to steady herself but to conceal the humiliation. Her vision cleared and she saw their faces. The same men she had spent months with, in mud, in sweat, in hours of drills no one sane would volunteer for. They looked away now, pretended they hadn't seen, pretended that her pain was invisible. She wondered, was this her real test? Not the endless marches, not the marksmanship trials, not the simulated hostage rescues, but this moment right here where someone could strike her and the room would stay silent. No instructor intervened. No officer barked for order. It was as if the rules bent just enough to make her less than one of them. She swallowed hard, the copper taste of blood rising in her mouth. She stood straighter. She would not break, not here, not in front of them. Still deep inside, a question she had buried for months began to surface. What was she proving, and to whom? The day had begun like every other. A cold morning, a mist crawling low over the base, breath hanging white in the air. She had laced her boots slower than usual, not from hesitation but from fatigue. Weeks of training had bled the energy from her body. Yet when she stepped into formation, shoulders back, jaw set, no one could see the cracks. No one except him. He had been watching her since day one. Not curiosity, not respect, something darker. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed the world already belonged to him, and maybe it did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp as broken glass. A man who had never once doubted his place in this unit. And maybe that's why he hated her. At first it had been words. Comments dropped in passing, sharp enough to cut but disguised as banter. Then it became harder to ignore. The push in the corridor, the equipment accidentally misplaced, the silence when she offered suggestions. But today it was no longer subtle. Today it was a boot to the side of her head in front of everyone. She touched her temple again, felt the dull throb. She wondered if she would bruise. Bruises told stories. Stories she didn't want written across her skin. And yet she said nothing. She held her breath. She let the silence hang. Because she understood something the others didn't. Silence was her weapon. It wasn't cowardice. It was calculation. Words could be twisted, arguments dismissed, but silence stayed. It unsettled people, made them wonder what you were planning. And in this place, where everything was stacked against her, silence was the only form of control she had left. The training day moved forward as though nothing had happened. Drills, weapons checks, target practice. She fired round after round, each shot cracking like a release of the tension inside her chest. Her grouping was tighter than anyone else's on the range. No one said it aloud, but she saw their glances. She was good, better than good, and that made her presence even harder for them to swallow. Still, the image of the strike replayed in her mind. Not the pain, but the silence after. That night in the barracks, the whispers began. Men laughing about something she couldn't hear. Boots stomping past her bunk. She kept her head down, eyes closed, pretending to sleep, pretending that none of it mattered. But inside, her thoughts were sharper than ever. She remembered the words of her father, a man who had served before her. The military doesn't change you, it reveals you. She wondered, what was it revealing in her? A strength she didn't know she had, or a fracture waiting to widen? Sleep never came. The air was thick, restless. She lay in silence, her pulse steady, waiting, always waiting. And then the sound came. Vehicles rolling in, engines low, deliberate. Boots on gravel. Doors opening with weight and finality. The energy shifted, and even the loudest voices fell quiet. Something was about to happen, something no one expected. When the three generals walked through the compound gates, every man straightened instinctively. Orders hadn't been given yet, but discipline was muscle memory. The highest-ranking officers carried presence like armor, and theirs was suffocating. She stood too, unsure if her dizziness from the strike earlier would betray her now. She forced herself upright, spine rigid, face unreadable. The generals didn't smile. They didn't nod. They didn't ask questions. They moved with grim intent, and within minutes the entire unit was pulled from the training bay into formation. The silence was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone. She scanned their faces. The one who had struck her looked uneasy for the first time. His eyes darted, his hands restless at his sides. She didn't know how they had learned of what happened. She hadn't spoken a word. She hadn't reported it. Maybe someone had. Or maybe, just maybe, the truth had a way of reaching the surface on its own. One of the generals stepped forward. His voice was low but carried across the cold night air. "This unit is suspended, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the formation. Shock, confusion, fear. Her heart pounded, suspended just like that. Months of sacrifice, training, endurance, all halted in an instant. The general continued, his eyes sweeping the group. "There are standards, standards higher than skill, higher than rank. When those are broken, we don't train soldiers, we create liabilities." His words weren't sharp, but they cut deeper than any insult she had heard. She stood motionless, the weight of it pressing against her chest. Part of her wanted vindication, to shout that she had endured, that she had been the one tested beyond the breaking point. But another part, the quieter part, understood something else. This wasn't about her. It was about all of them, about the silence that had hung in that training bay when she was struck. The silence that had revealed not just who she was, but who they all were. As the formation was dismissed, as the generals turned and left with the same authority they had arrived with, she remained still. Her head throbbed, her body ached, but her resolve had never felt sharper. She realized she was standing at a crossroads. The unit might be gone, the training suspended, but her journey was not over. Something had begun in that silence, something that demanded an answer. And though she didn't know what the path ahead would look like, she knew one thing: she would not be silent forever. Because silence had carried her this far. But action, measured, deliberate, unshakable, would carry her further. The night closed in around her, cold and unrelenting. She exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to mark the end of something and the uncertain beginning of something else. She didn't yet know what the generals had seen, what they had heard, or why they had chosen that moment to end it. But she knew this: moments like these did not happen by accident. And someday, when the truth revealed itself, she would be ready. Why did the generals move so fast? That question haunted her long after their convoy disappeared into the night. Soldiers whispered theories, some wild, some fearful, but no one really knew. Units didn't just get shut down overnight, not unless something bigger was in motion. She sat on her bunk, boots still on, staring at the floor. The others paced, muttered, cursed under their breath. No one spoke to her directly. They avoided her eyes as though meeting her gaze would make the truth too clear. And maybe they were right. She leaned back against the cold steel of the wall, pressing her throbbing temple into it. The pain grounded her. She let her mind run back through the sequence of events: the strike, the silence, the sudden arrival of the generals. It couldn't have been coincidence. Someone had spoken. But who? She hadn't asked for protection. She hadn't begged for intervention. If anything, the attention made things worse. Soldiers despised weakness, but they despised favoritism more. And now she was caught in the middle of both. That night sleep stayed far from her. Every sound felt amplified: the drip of a leaking pipe, the creak of a bunk spring, the restless breathing of men too angry or too afraid to rest. She lay still, eyes open to the ceiling. When dawn broke, there were no orders, no drills, no schedule. The unit was frozen, suspended in time. They wandered the grounds like restless ghosts, stripped of purpose. And in the absence of orders, Rumor became their currency. She overheard fragments: investigation, violation of conduct, political fallout. Each word was heavy, but none answered the question burning in her chest. Why her? Why now? By midday, tempers boiled. Men argued in corners, voices rising, fists clenching. Some blamed her outright. One spat the words across the yard, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what happens when you let them in. Them, as if she were not a soldier standing among them, but some alien force, foreign to the fabric of the unit. She kept walking, pretending not to hear, though the words cut sharper than the boot to her head ever had. But not everyone was cruel. In the shadows of hostility there were flickers of something else. A young recruit barely out of school, face still soft despite the dirt and sweat, caught her eye once. He didn't speak, but his look carried something different. Not pity, not contempt, just recognition. It reminded her that silence could cut both ways. It could isolate, but it could also protect. She thought back to the day she first arrived. She had stood in line for medical clearance, papers in hand, surrounded by men who laughed and cursed and shoved. No one had made space for her, but she hadn't asked. She had taken it, step by step, quietly. And now here she was, again at the edge of something she couldn't control. That evening she was summoned, a knock on the barrack door, a name spoken, hers. The room fell into silence. Dozens of eyes followed her as she stood, straightened her uniform, and walked out. The air outside was colder than before, sharp against her lungs. 2 MPs waited, their faces were expressionless. You're wanted at command. She didn't ask why. Questions only revealed fear. She fell in step, boots crunching on gravel, heart steady but heavy. The walk felt longer than it was. Every step carried weight, uncertainty, anticipation, dread. The command tent loomed ahead, lit from within by a single harsh light. When the flap opened, she stepped inside and froze. The 3 generals were there, still, waiting. Their presence pressed down like gravity. She saluted, held her stance, fought to keep her breathing even. One of them, a man with silver hair and eyes that seemed carved from stone, spoke first. You didn't report it. Her throat tightened, so they knew. No, sir, she replied, voice even. Why? She paused. The truth weighed heavy. Because reporting it would make her weak. Because silence was the only weapon she had. Because she wasn't sure anyone would believe her. But she couldn't say all that. She could only give the piece of truth that mattered. Because I could endure it, sir. The general studied her for a long time. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. And what of the silence that followed? He asked. What of them? Her chest tightened. This was the real test, wasn't it? Not her endurance, not her silence, but her ability to name what had truly happened. They made their choice, sir, she said softly. Silence can protect or it can betray. They chose. The general leaned back, exhaling slowly. His gaze flicked to the others, then back to her. Do you know why we shut them down? He asked. She shook her head. Because strength without integrity is rot, and rot spreads. If they can't protect the dignity of one soldier, they can't be trusted to protect the nation. His words hit her harder than the strike had. They weren't about her, they were about the soul of the unit. Another general spoke, his voice lower, almost reflective. We've seen this before. Silence used as a shield. Silence used as a knife. You walked a thin line, and you're still walking it. Her heart pounded. Was this an interrogation or an evaluation? She couldn't tell. Then came the question she hadn't expected. Do you still want to serve? The room went quiet, heavy as stone. Her chest tightened. Did she, after everything, after the strike, the silence, the betrayal? Her mind flooded with memories. The long nights studying maps, the hours on the range, the voice of her father reminding her that the military revealed who you truly were. And she heard her own heart answer before her lips did. Yes, sir. The generals exchanged glances. Not approval, not disapproval, just acknowledgement. "Then we will see," the silver-haired general said finally. "But understand this, your path forward will not be easy. You carry silence like armor, but there will come a day when silence will no longer protect you." She held his gaze. For the first time she felt a flicker of something she hadn't in months. Not pride, not fear, but clarity. "Yes, sir," she said again. They dismissed her with a nod. She saluted, turned, and stepped out into the night. The cold air hit her like truth. She walked back toward the barracks, every step echoing with the weight of what had just passed. The men would stare, whisper, hate her more than before. But it didn't matter. Because now she understood something deeper. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about purpose. And though the road ahead would be harsher than anything she had yet faced, she felt the faintest ember of hope flicker inside her chest. She knew she wasn't done, not by a long shot. What happens when you are pulled from the only place you know, not because you failed but because others did? That question haunted her as the transport plane lifted off the runway, its engines growling against the night. She sat strapped in, helmet in her lap, duffel bag at her feet. No one spoke to her, not the crew, not the handful of soldiers seated rows away. She didn't know where she was being sent. Orders had been brief, almost cryptic. A reassignment. Temporary maybe, permanent maybe. The kind of movement you didn't question if you wanted to stay in the system. She stared at the metal floor beneath her boots, the vibration of the plane numbing her thoughts. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind refused to rest. Every moment replayed, the strike, the silence, the general's words. Each fragment was a reminder that she was now marked. Not a victim, not a hero, something in between. A soldier with a shadow on her record. Hours later, the plane landed at a forward operating base tucked into mountains she didn't recognize. The air was thinner, colder, sharper. She was escorted across gravel toward a cluster of tents glowing faintly in the dark. The officer who received her wasted no time. His face was weathered, eyes alert. He looked her over once without expression and handed her a file. "You'll be with us until further notice. No questions, understood?" "Yes, sir." He nodded, then walked away, leaving her standing in the cold. Inside the barracks, the atmosphere was different from the one she had left. This unit was smaller, leaner. Soldiers moved with quiet precision, no wasted energy, no unnecessary chatter. They looked at her when she entered, but not with hostility, more like curiosity. Still, she felt the weight of being an outsider. She found her bunk, stowed her gear, and sat in silence. The others carried on around her, their rhythm uninterrupted. She envied it, the ease with which they belonged. She wondered if she had ever felt that way. The next morning came quickly. Drills at dawn, briefings in the chill air, weapons checks under the sharp eye of their commanding officer. Everything here moved faster, sharper, cleaner than she was used to. Mistakes were not corrected with shouting. They simply weren't tolerated. And yet, as she settled into the rhythm, she felt something stir. The precision fit her. The silence didn't cut her here, it matched her. Days blurred. She trained harder than before, pushing past the ache in her body, past the whisper of doubt in her chest. On the range, she was unmatched. Her shots struck true, clean, unwavering. At night, she studied maps, memorized patterns, traced routes with her finger until she could see them in her sleep. But still, whispers followed. She knew what they were saying. She was the one pulled from a broken unit, the one protected by generals, the one who carried silence like armor. One evening after drills, a soldier sat beside her on the mess bench. He was older than most, face lined, voice quiet. "You don't talk much." She didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure if it was a question or a challenge. Finally she said, "Not much to say." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes that's strength, sometimes it's a wound. You know the difference." She met his gaze steady. "I'm learning." That seemed to satisfy him. He stood, leaving her with her thoughts. That night she lay awake, listening to the wind scrape across the canvas walls of the tent. She thought about his words. Was her silence strength, or was it the scar she carried from the blow, from the betrayal, from everything she hadn't said? She didn't know yet, but she knew she would find out. The answer came sooner than she expected. A week later, the commanding officer called her in. The tent was dim, the map spread across the table lit by a single lamp. He gestured for her to sit. "You've been assigned to an operation," he said. "Recon, high risk. You'll be in the field with a small team. We need eyes on a target before a larger force can move. It'll be quiet, invisible, and it'll test you." Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed still. "Understood, sir." He studied her. "We know what happened in your last unit. We also know what you're capable of. Consider this your chance to prove what kind of soldier you are." She nodded. "I won't fail." The officer's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "See that you don't." The briefing was short, the details sharp. A valley across the border, hostile presence suspected. A cartel leader rumored to be moving through. They needed confirmation, photographs, intelligence, nothing more. At least on paper. When she returned to the barracks, the others were already prepping gear. She checked her rifle, her optics, every piece of equipment with the precision of ritual. Each click, each adjustment steadied her heartbeat. That night before departure, she found herself staring at her reflection in the small shard of mirror tucked above her bunk. The bruise on her temple had faded, but the memory of it had not. She touched the spot lightly, then lowered her hand. This mission wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving herself to those who doubted. It was about something deeper, finding out if silence could hold under fire or if it would finally shatter. The convoy left at dawn. Trucks rumbled over rough terrain, the horizon stretching endless and hostile. She sat in the back, helmet low, eyes scanning the landscape. Hours later, they reached the drop point. From there, it was boots and silence. The team moved like shadows, weaving through scrub and stone, every step deliberate. As the sun set, they reached the ridge overlooking the valley. The world below was quiet, deceptively so. Smoke curled faintly from a distant structure. Vehicles dotted the dirt road like scattered teeth. She settled behind her rifle, scope scanning, breath steady. Every detail sharpened, the glint of metal, the shift of shadows, the faint movement at the edge of the compound. She reported what she saw, voice low, precise. The team listened. No one questioned her. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't in months: belonging. Not because they welcomed her, but because the silence was finally hers to command. Still, as darkness fell and the valley shifted into deeper shadow, a thought whispered at the back of her mind. There was something here they hadn't been told, something hidden beneath the surface of this mission. And though she didn't know what it was yet, she knew one thing: silence would not protect her forever. Not here, not in this valley. Why did the valley feel wrong? That question sat heavy in her chest as she lay prone on the ridge, eye pressed to her scope. The wind was steady, her breathing calm, her heartbeat slow. Conditions were perfect for observation. And yet, something felt off. Below, the compound flickered with life. A few figures moved, shadows slipping between buildings, headlights cutting briefly through the dust. On the surface, it looked ordinary, too ordinary. She shifted slightly, adjusting her scope, scanning each doorway, each rooftop. The silence pressed against her ears. In places like this, silence wasn't safety. It was camouflage, and sometimes it was bait. The team lay spread out along the ridge, each man watching a different sector. No one spoke except to pass quiet updates over the radio. They trusted the silence. But she couldn't shake the unease. Her commander's words replayed in her head: "Consider this your chance." The phrasing had been deliberate. This wasn't just another operation, it was a test of her endurance, her judgment, her will. She exhaled slowly, watching a truck pull into the compound. A group of men stepped out, weapons slung casually over their shoulders. One carried a case. Heavy, metallic, the kind of case that didn't hold food or tools. Her pulse quickened. She adjusted her angle, zooming in. The man set the case down, opened it. She caught the faint glint of something inside, shapes too clean, too precise. Not money, not drugs, weapons. She relayed the detail, voice low, calm. The team murmured acknowledgement, but their commander's reply was different. Hold position, no movement yet. She frowned. That wasn't right. Intelligence like this wasn't just for watching. It demanded a call, a decision, yet the order was to wait. Hours passed. The compound stayed restless, alive. Men came and went. Fires burned low. Laughter drifted faintly up the ridge, and always the case sat in the center like a quiet threat. Night deepened. The team grew stiff, weary, but no one dared shift without purpose. Then movement. A convoy of vehicles rolled into the compound, engines low, lights dimmed. She tightened her grip on the rifle, eyes sharp. Men poured out. Not just foot soldiers, leaders, the kind of men who didn't appear unless something critical was happening. And then she saw him. The figure who stepped out of the central vehicle was taller than the rest, his movements slower, deliberate. His presence carried weight. Even without insignia, you could feel it. This wasn't just another player. This was someone higher. Her breath caught just for a second. Could this be the target? She reported the sighting. Again, the commander's reply was the same. Hold. Her frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior. Why hold? Why wait when confirmation was right there? Unless this wasn't really about the target, unless this was about her. She swallowed hard, keeping her focus. If this was a test, she couldn't fail it. She forced herself back into the rhythm of observation. Through her scope, she caught the faintest detail, a scar across the leader's jaw, catching the firelight. She burned the image into her memory. Hours stretched, silence heavy, until finally the vehicles began to pull out. The case was loaded again. The convoy rolled away, leaving the compound quieter, emptier. The team held position until dawn broke. Only then did the order come. Exfil. They moved back through the mountains, boots grinding over stone, bodies heavy with fatigue. The silence was different now, thicker, weighted with unspoken questions. Back at base, she stripped her gear, wiped her rifle clean, filed into the debriefing tent. The commander sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Report. Each man spoke in turn, delivering details, observations, fragments of intelligence. When it came to her, she gave her account with precision. The scar, the case, the convoy, every detail sharp, controlled. The commander nodded, made a note, then dismissed the group. But as the others filed out, he stopped her. Stay. Her chest tightened. She stood at attention, waiting. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You saw more than the rest. She held his gaze. I watched closer, sir. His mouth curved, not into a smile but something sharper. No, you've been watched closer. That's why you were sent here. Her pulse quickened, though her face stayed calm. Sir. He tapped the file on the table. The generals didn't send you here to test your skill. They already knew you had that. They sent you here to test your silence, to see if you'd break it, to see if you'd speak when it mattered. The words hit her harder than she expected. All this time she thought she was enduring, but in truth she'd been measured. Her commander leaned forward, voice lower now. You didn't break. You observed. You waited. That tells me one thing, you're not here by accident. You're here because they want to see what silence becomes when sharpened. Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask what came next, but she knew the answer before he gave it. There will be another mission, one more dangerous than this, and it won't just test your silence. It will test who you are when silence no longer serves you. He dismissed her with a flick of his hand. She saluted, turned and walked out into the cold air. The mountains loomed against the fatting sky, sharp and unforgiving. She stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of it all pressing against her chest. So this was why she was here. Not to hide, not to endure, but to be measured piece by piece until the generals knew what she truly was. She exhaled slowly, a breath that trembled at the edges. For the first time she wondered, not if she could endure, but if she could live with what endurance turned her into. Night fell, and with it a restless quiet. She lay awake, eyes on the dark canvas above her, listening to the wind. She thought about the strike, about the silence, about the general's words, about the scarred man in the valley. And a thought struck her like a blade. What if all of this was connected? What if the blow she had endured, the silence she had carried, the general's sudden intervention, what if none of it had been coincidence? Her chest tightened. She realized something she hadn't before. She wasn't just surviving someone else's story. She was walking into the heart of her own. And the silence that had once protected her was about to be broken. How long could silence hold before it shattered? That thought followed her as the team prepped gear in the icy pre-dawn dark. The mission had been confirmed just hours before. Short briefing, few details, only the essentials. Infiltration into hostile territory, reconnaissance and intelligence capture. No direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. It sounded simple on paper. Missions like these always did. But she had learned by now, simple briefs hid complex truths. She moved through the ritual of preparation, hands steady, checking her rifle, her optics, her sidearm. Each piece of gear was more than metal and polymer. Each was reassurance, something she could control when everything else was uncertain. Around her, the team worked in silence. The older soldier, the one who'd once asked her if silence was strength or a wound, gave her the faintest nod as he strapped on his vest. No words, just acknowledgement. It steadied her more than she expected. The convoy rolled out before dawn, trucks bouncing over uneven terrain, headlights off, only the glow of moonlight on the mountains to guide them. She sat in the back, helmet low, eyes forward, her thoughts as sharp as her breath in the cold air. She tried not to think of the scarred man from the last mission, but his image haunted her. The way he carried himself, the way men deferred to him. Leaders didn't appear by accident. He was important, and if he was important, the generals had known. The question that gnawed at her wasn't why she had seen him. It was why they had wanted her to. Hours later, the truck stopped. Boots hit dirt. The team moved out on foot, shadows slipping into the dark valleys. They trekked for miles, each step measured, the silence absolute. When they finally reached the overlook, dawn had begun to pale the horizon. Below lay another compound larger than the first. Guard towers, vehicles, satellite dishes. This wasn't a cartel hideout, it was infrastructure. And at the center, men moved with purpose. Not scattered, not chaotic, organized, trained. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't what they'd been told. She adjusted her scope, scanning. Soldiers in mismatched gear. Not a formal army, but not amateurs either. And there, at the far edge of the compound, she saw him, the scarred man, again. It was no coincidence. She whispered the sighting into her comms. The reply came back sharp, immediate. Hold, do not engage. Her jaw clenched, the same order, always to hold, to wait, to watch. But for how long? Until the silence itself became betrayal. The hours crawled. The team documented movement, snapped photos, marked coordinates. But every second her focus stayed locked on him. The scarred man moved with calm authority, inspecting, speaking, pointing. Men deferred to him without hesitation. He wasn't just a leader, he was the leader. And then something shifted. A group of vehicles rolled into the compound. Men jumped out, dragging 2 prisoners from the back. Civilians beaten, terrified. She saw their faces in her scope, swollen and bloodied. They were thrown to the ground, rifles raised above them. Her chest tightened. She reported what she saw. Silence answered, then the order. Hold. Her hand tightened on her rifle. She forced her breathing to stay steady, but inside her chest, something cracked. This wasn't observation. This wasn't intelligence. This was watching. Watching two human lives snuffed out while she did nothing. The first prisoner was dragged upright. A man with hollow eyes, blood on his shirt. One of the soldiers raised a pistol. Her finger hovered over her trigger. She knew the rules. This was not her fight. This was not her mission. Her silence was her weapon. Her silence kept her alive. But as the pistol pressed against the man's head, a thought rose unbidden. What if silence is the betrayal? The shot cracked through the valley. The man dropped. The other prisoner screamed. Her stomach turned, bile rising. She closed her eyes for half a second, fighting to steady herself. When she looked again, the second prisoner was dragged to the same spot. She whispered urgently into the comms, "They're executing civilians. We can stop this." The reply came back, cold and final. "Do not engage, hold position." Her hands trembled on the rifle. She exhaled slowly, fighting the storm inside her. To obey meant to watch. To break silence meant to act. The soldier below raised his pistol again. Her finger found the trigger. Time slowed. She thought of the blow to her head, the silence of the unit, the general's words, the scarred man's eyes. All of it converged into this moment, into this decision. The rifle cracked. The soldier dropped. Chaos exploded in the compound. Men shouted, scrambled, weapons raised. The second prisoner fell back, stunned but alive. Her comms erupted with fury. Who fired? Who fired? But she didn't answer. She was already adjusting, shifting, scanning for threats. Her silence was broken now, shattered beyond repair. The team scrambled for cover, curses hissing through the radios. Orders blurred. The ridge became alive with fire, bullets slicing the air. She stayed calm, her scope tracked. Another hostile raised his rifle, her shot dropped him. She moved, adjusted, fired again. Each round was precise, deliberate, controlled chaos. But inside she knew the truth. This wasn't about skill. It was about choice. The scarred man disappeared into a building, shouting orders. Vehicles roared to life. The compound was no longer observation. It was war. Exfil, exfil. Her commander's voice cut through the chaos. The team pulled back, sliding down the ridge, returning fire as they moved. She covered them, each shot a shield, her silence replaced by thunder. They ran for hours, lungs burning, until they reached the extraction point. A helicopter swept in, rotors screaming, pulling them out under fire. When the bird lifted, she sat against the metal wall, rifle in her lap, chest heaving. The team avoided her eyes, but she could feel their anger, their fear. Back at base, the debriefing was short and brutal. The commander's voice shook with controlled rage. "You disobeyed a direct order." She stood at attention, body trembling, but her voice was steady. "Yes, sir." "You compromised the mission." "Yes, sir." "You risked the lives of every man on that ridge." "Yes, sir." He stared at her, fury burning in his eyes. Then he slammed his fist on the table. "Why?" Her throat tightened. She could give excuses. She could speak of morality, of justice, of the line between silence and betrayal. But in the end, the truth was simple. Because silence wasn't enough. The words hung in the room like a sentence. The commander's jaw tightened. He leaned in close, eyes locked on hers. "Then you'd better hope the generals agree with you, because if they don't, you're finished." She stood there, trembling but unbroken, her chest heavy with the weight of what she had done. And in her heart she knew, finished or not, silence would never protect her again. What does it mean to disobey when obedience is survival? That question echoed in her head as she sat alone in the dim holding room, her rifle stripped away, her gear locked outside. The mission had ended the moment her trigger broke the silence. And though her body still carried the ache of escape, the true weight pressed deeper, in her chest, in her lungs, in the pit of her stomach. The room smelled faintly of oil and metal. A single bulb buzzed overhead. She sat at a steel table, her hands flat against the cold surface. Her reflection stared back at her in the sheen. Hard eyes, dirt on her face, a bruise shadowing her jaw where the butt of her rifle had struck during the scramble. The door opened. Her commander entered. He didn't sit. He loomed over the table, hands gripping the edge. His face was stone, but his eyes were fire. "You had one order." His voice was low, the kind of quiet that carried more threat than shouting ever could. "One order, and you broke it." She swallowed hard, kept her gaze steady. "I saved a civilian." "You endangered all of us." Her chest tightened, but she didn't look away. "If we stand by while innocent people die, then what are we protecting?" His fist slammed onto the table, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. "You don't get to decide that. Orders are not suggestions. They're the difference between cohesion and chaos, between life and death." She wanted to argue, to shout, to make him see what she had seen through the scope. The hollow eyes of a man about to be erased, the terror of the second prisoner waiting his turn. But she knew words would not bend him. He was forged in obedience, in the certainty that orders were survival. So she said nothing. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, he straightened, exhaling through his nose like a man trying to contain his rage. "You'll stay here until command decides your fate," he said. "And if there's any justice left in this system, you'll never see the field again." He turned, the door slamming behind him. She let the silence settle, but inside the storm raged. Hours passed, maybe more. The bulb buzzed, her stomach growled. Time bled into itself until the sound of boots in the hall snapped her awake. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't her commander. It was them. 3 generals stepped into the room, their presence pressing down like gravity. The air shifted. Her throat went dry. She stood automatically, saluting, her body moving on instinct even as her mind whirled. The silver-haired general, the one whose eyes seemed carved from stone, spoke first. "Sit." She obeyed. The generals remained standing, looming like judges at a tribunal. Their expressions revealed nothing. "You disobeyed," the silver-haired one said flatly. "Yes, sir." "You compromised the mission." "Yes, sir." "You risked the lives of your team." Her voice was steady, but her chest pounded. "Yes, sir." Silence heavy, endless. Then the second general spoke, his voice softer, almost reflective. "And yet you acted. You saw a choice and you made it. Why?" She hesitated. The truth was sharp and dangerous on her tongue, but she had carried silence too long to let it betray her now. Finally she said, "Because silence was no longer enough." The words hung in the air. The generals exchanged glances, brief, unreadable. The third general, who had spoken little before, stepped closer. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and probing. "Do you know why we placed you here? Why we moved you after shutting down your last unit?" Her pulse quickened. She shook her head. "It wasn't punishment," he said. "It was observation. We needed to know whether silence was strength or weakness, whether you endured out of conviction or fear." Her breath caught. The silver-haired general's voice cut in, sharp. "You endured the strike. You endured the silence of your peers. You endured isolation. And then, when faced with a choice, you broke silence not for yourself, but for another." His words pressed into her chest, heavy, almost unbearable. "Do you understand what that means?" She didn't answer, couldn't. The second general's voice softened again. "It means you carry what most cannot. You carry silence as a shield, but you know when to lay it down. That makes you dangerous. That makes you valuable." Her throat tightened. She wasn't sure if the weight she felt was pride or fear. The silver-haired general leaned closer. "But understand this. What you did tonight will not vanish. It will follow you. Some will call it betrayal, some will call it courage. What we call it depends on what you do next." Her voice cracked just slightly when she spoke. "What happens next, sir?" The general straightened. "You'll be reassigned, again, not as punishment, as preparation. There are missions that require silence, and there are missions that require someone who knows when to break it." Her heart pounded, the room blurring for a second. Another reassignment, another test, another path she couldn't see the end of. The generals turned to leave, but at the door the silver-haired one paused, glancing back. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, remember that." And then they were gone. She sat in the silence they left behind, her body trembling, her mind racing. The door stayed closed for hours. When it finally opened again, it was the older soldier, the one who had once asked her whether silence was strength or a wound. He leaned against the frame, studying her. "So, you fired." She didn't answer. He smirked faintly, but his eyes were heavy. "Good, someone had to." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They'll use you now, the generals. You feel it, don't you? This wasn't about orders. It was about them finding someone willing to carry weight the rest of us can't." Her chest tightened. "And if I don't want to be used?" His gaze softened. "Then you shouldn't have pulled that trigger." Silence stretched between them, thick with truth neither wanted to speak. Finally he straightened, nodding once. "Get some rest, you'll need it." When he left, she sank back against the cold wall, her hands trembling in her lap. For the first time she allowed herself to feel it, the weight, the fear, the quiet thread of pride tangled within it. She had acted, she had broken silence, and nothing would ever be the same. But as she closed her eyes, one truth cut through the storm inside her. This wasn't the end of her test. It was only the beginning. What kind of soldier are you when the war is no longer out in the open? That question pressed against her chest as the helicopter cut across the night sky, its rotors hammering the silence into submission. She sat strapped in, gear tight against her body, eyes locked on the floor. No one spoke. This wasn't like her last assignment. The soldiers beside her weren't regular operators. Their uniforms were stripped of insignia. Their eyes were older, colder. They didn't look at her, not even in curiosity. They knew why she was there, or maybe they knew enough not to ask. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. 5 minutes. Her pulse steadied. She breathed in, breathed out. Every nerve in her body understood what was coming. This wasn't training, wasn't reconnaissance, wasn't patience on a ridge. This was something else, something unspoken. The team touched down on barren ground, moonlight spilling silver across jagged stone. They moved like shadows, swift, silent, coordinated. She followed, each step deliberate, every muscle tuned to the rhythm of the hunt. The target wasn't a compound this time. It was a convoy. Intelligence suggested a meeting in the desert, leaders gathering to exchange more than just money or weapons. Something larger, something worth the general's attention. They set up an overwatch position on a ridge overlooking a dry riverbed. Hours passed. The desert night stretched long, broken only by the rustle of wind against sand. Then headlights pierced the dark. 2 convoys approached from opposite directions, engines growling low. They met at the base of the riverbed, dust swirling in the moonlight. Figures emerged, their silhouettes sharp against the pale ground. She adjusted her scope. At the center of one group she saw him, the scarred man, again. Her stomach tightened. Twice now. Different regions, different circumstances. That meant only one thing: this wasn't coincidence. He wasn't a leader of a faction. He was the thread running through them all. She whispered into her comms, "Visual on scarred target." No acknowledgement came, just silence. She adjusted again, watching as the groups exchanged cases, shook hands, spoke words she couldn't hear. But it wasn't the movement that caught her. It was the posture, the way men deferred, the way power bent around him. And then, suddenly, a second figure stepped from the opposite convoy. Her heart skipped. This man carried no scars, no visible markers, but the reaction was unmistakable. Even the scarred man inclined his head slightly in deference. She reported again, voice low even. Still no reply. Her unease deepened. This wasn't an observation mission. This was something else. Then her commander's voice crackled finally, low and sharp. "Hold, do not fire, do not move, just watch." Her jaw clenched, always hold, always silent. But as she watched the two men stand face to face, she realized what this was. This wasn't about gathering intelligence. This was about identifying, confirming. The generals hadn't sent her here to see what would happen. They sent her here to see who these men were, and maybe to see what she would do. The meeting broke. The convoys turned, engines growling as they split into the night. Dust swallowed them whole. The team stayed frozen, the order still in place. Then finally the command came. Exfil. Back at base, the debrief was short, clinical. The commander asked for details, and each soldier gave them. When it came to her, she gave hers with the same precision she always did. The scarred man, the second figure, the dynamic between them. But her commander's eyes stayed on her longer than the others. He wrote nothing, said nothing, just studied her. Afterward she was pulled aside. A separate tent, a dim light, a single chair. The generals were waiting. Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She saluted, then stood still as they looked her over. The silver-haired general spoke first. "You saw him again?" "Yes, sir." "And the second man?" She hesitated, unknown, but the scarred one deferred to him. The general nodded slowly. "That's what we needed to know." Her pulse quickened. Needed to know. That meant this mission had never been about the convoy itself. It had been about her eyes, about what she could see that others might miss. The second general leaned forward, his voice quieter, more pointed. "Do you understand why we chose you?" Her throat tightened. She shook her head. "Because you carry silence," he said. "But silence has sharpened you. You see what others overlook. You endure what others break under, and you act when others freeze." The silver-haired general's gaze cut into her. "The scarred man is not your enemy. Not yet. The one behind him, the one you saw tonight, that is the real shadow. And we needed to know if you could tell the difference." Her chest tightened. She thought back to the desert, to the subtle nod, the quiet deference. It had been small, almost invisible, but she had seen it. And now she understood. This wasn't about silence anymore. This was about sight, about judgment, about carrying the unbearable weight of knowing when to hold and when to break. The third general, who had been silent until now, spoke at last. His voice was low, almost weary. "You are being prepared, not for missions like these, for something greater, something that requires silence, sight, and action, all bound together." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of mission, sir?" They didn't answer. Instead, the silver-haired general stepped closer, his voice firm. "You don't need to know yet. All you need to remember is this: silence kept you alive. Sight will guide you, but action will define you." The words pressed into her like a brand. Silence, sight, action, the trinity of everything she had become. The generals dismissed her. She walked out into the desert night, the stars burning sharp above her. She stood still, breathing in the cold air, her chest heavy. She thought about the prisoner she had saved, about the silence she had broken, about the scarred man and the shadow behind him. And for the first time she realized this wasn't about proving herself anymore. It wasn't even about surviving. It was about becoming something she didn't yet understand. And somewhere deep inside, where silence could no longer reach, she felt both fear and resolve intertwine. Because she knew one thing: the next mission would not test her. It would define her. What does it cost to carry silence, sight, and action all at once? That question lingered in her chest as she sat in the dim briefing tent, The map spread before her under a single lamp. The air smelled of dust and ink, heavy with the weight of decisions not yet spoken. The generals had summoned her alone this time. No team, no commander, just her. The silver-haired general pointed to the map. His voice was low, precise. "This is the final link. The scarred man will be here, and the shadow behind him. You've seen both. You know their patterns, their deference, their power. This time we need more than confirmation. We need resolution." Her chest tightened. She understood what he meant even if he didn't say it outright. This wasn't reconnaissance. This wasn't observation. This was action. Her throat was dry when she asked, "And if silence fails?" The general's eyes locked on hers. "Then you decide. That's why you're here." The words sank into her bones. You decide, not orders, not obedience, not silence, choice. She nodded once, steady, understood. The mission began at dusk. She moved alone, crossing jagged ridges and dry riverbeds, her pack heavy, her rifle a familiar weight against her shoulder. The desert stretched endless, its silence pressing against her ears. But this time she didn't hide in it. She carried it like a mantle. Night fell. She reached the overlook, settling into position. The compound below glowed faintly, alive with movement. Vehicles rolled in, headlights dimmed, engines low. She adjusted her scope, her breath steady. And there he was, the scarred man. He moved with the same deliberate calm, his presence anchoring the chaos around him. Men deferred, obeyed, bent. But then another figure emerged. The second one, the shadow. No scars, no markers, nothing outward to betray him. And yet the air shifted when he stepped into view. Even the scarred man inclined his head. Her breath caught. This was it, the moment everything had been moving toward. She reported what she saw. Silence answered. No orders, no directives, nothing. Her chest tightened. This was no mistake. The generals weren't going to tell her what to do. They had brought her here to see what choice she would make when silence no longer protected her. Through her scope she watched as the two men spoke, their gestures calm, controlled. A case was exchanged, papers signed, weapons inspected. And then 2 civilians were dragged into the circle. Her stomach dropped. The memory of the last time hit her like a blade. The first prisoner, the shot she hadn't taken. The second prisoner, the shot that shattered everything. Her hand trembled against the rifle. This was the same pattern, the same test. But this time no commander's voice crackled in her ear. No order to hold, no order at all. The pistol was raised. Her finger found the trigger. Her heart pounded. She thought of everything, the blow to her head, the silence of her first unit, the general's words, the scarred man's scar, the shadow's power. She thought of the prisoner she had saved and the truth the generals had spoken. Silence, sight, action. The world seemed to narrow to the crosshairs in her scope. She exhaled. The rifle cracked. The man holding the pistol dropped. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire. The compound exploded into movement. She shifted, firing again, covering the civilians as they scrambled away. Each shot was precise, deliberate. She wasn't firing for vengeance. She wasn't firing for glory. She was firing for choice. But then movement at the edge of her scope. The scarred man turned, searching the ridge. And behind him, the shadow stepped closer, his face finally clear in the moonlight. She froze. It wasn't just authority in his eyes. It was calculation, cold, patient. The kind of power that didn't need scars or weapons to bend others. The kind of power that didn't fear silence because it controlled it. For the first time she understood, this was never about the scarred man. He was a shield, a distraction. The real threat was the one who didn't need to be seen. Her breath hitched, her finger hovered on the trigger. She could end it now. But her chest tightened with doubt. Was this her choice to make? Was this the action the generals wanted, or the trap they had set? The shadow's gaze lifted, scanning the ridge. For a heartbeat, it felt like his eyes met hers through the scope. And in that instant, she realized the truth. The generals hadn't sent her here to kill him. They had sent her here to see if she would. Her chest ached. She lowered her rifle. She whispered into her comms, her voice steady. Target identified, confirmed, but I will not pull the trigger without orders. Silence answered. For long seconds, only silence. Then, at last, the silver-haired general's voice crackled faintly. Understood. The compound below erupted further, vehicles fleeing, soldiers scattering. The scarred man vanished into the chaos, the shadows slipping with him. She lay still, rifle steady, heart pounding. She had chosen not silence, not blind action, choice. When the dust cleared, when the night swallowed the valley again, she packed her gear and moved back through the desert, alone. At dawn, she returned to base. The generals were waiting. They studied her as she stood at attention, dust clinging to her uniform, her rifle heavy in her hands. The silver-haired general spoke first. You saw him, and you chose. She nodded, yes, sir. And why did you hold? Her throat tightened, but her voice was clear. Because action without clarity is chaos, and silence without conviction is betrayal. Sometimes the hardest choice is to wait. The general's eyes held hers. Then, for the first time, she saw something flicker there. Not just calculation, not just judgment, but respect. He nodded once. You understand now. Silence carried you, sight sharpened you, and action, you've learned it doesn't always mean pulling the trigger. Her chest ached, relief, fear, pride, all tangled into one. The generals dismissed her with no promise of what came next. No glory, no certainty, only the knowledge that she had passed through something few ever would. That night, lying awake under the cold desert stars, she thought of everything. The silence, the strike, the scarred man, the shadow. She realized her story wasn't about being the strongest, the fastest, the most obedient. It wasn't even about being seen. It was about knowing when silence is dignity, when sight is truth, and when action is more than a bullet. She exhaled slowly, letting the desert wind carry the weight of it away. And though no one would ever truly know, she understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.